Pay close attention to these images. You are watching an infrared recording of a Ukrainian drone in flight deep inside Russian territory. Now, pay attention as the camera zooms in. Do you see those dark spots scattered across the fuselage and the wings? Those are holes. Dozens of them. That drone was hit. It was hit. It's hard to tell for sure if it was anti-aircraft fire, a Russian soldier on the ground firing his rifle up, or both. But what matters is this. It was supposed to have gone down. Most drones worldwide would have crashed. Not this one, and it keeps flying straight and steady. As if those holes meant absolutely nothing. It's absurd. It's the kind of footage you watch 2 or 3 times in a row trying to understand what you're looking at. Because something like that, according to the manuals of any air force in the world, should be shattered on the ground. But it's not. It's flying. When this footage went viral, the reactions were unanimous. The comments kept piling up. That's a beast. It looks like Swiss cheese, but it keeps flying. It withstood heavy anti-aircraft fire easily. But the story behind it is even stranger than what you just saw. Because this drone shouldn't exist. And to understand how it exists and why it can do what it does, we need to ask an uncomfortable question. A question that few Western military analysts want to answer out loud. What if the advantage in modern warfare no longer belongs to the richer side? This drone has a name. It's called E-300 Enterprise. And here begins the part that no one expected, because the E-300 wasn't designed by a giant of the military industry. It didn't come out of a secret research center. It didn't come from a Ukrainian government program with billions of dollars invested. It was built by Aerodrone, a small company founded in 2018. And before the war, Aerodrone didn't make weapons. It didn't make military equipment. It didn't even make reconnaissance drones. Aerodrone made agricultural drones, the kind that sprays pesticide on crops. It was such an obscure company that very few people in Ukraine even knew it existed. The products themselves had no market, not at home nor abroad. And it was this small, forgotten, off-the-radar company that ended up building one of the most resilient and most dangerous drones in this entire war. But there's a part that's even more absurd because the E-300 wasn't designed from scratch. It's actually an adaptation. It's based on a small civilian plane called Sky Ranger Swift. A sport ultralight, the kind of plane that amateur pilots use to fly on weekends. The Ukrainians took a small recreational plane, removed the pilot, filled it with electronics, packed it with explosives, and sent it to fly 1,700 kilometers into Russia. To understand why this happened, we need to go back to the beginning of the war. In February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainians had a huge problem. They had no way to strike deep inside Russia. Ukraine had artillery, short-range missiles, and tactical drones to use at the front, but to hit targets hundreds or thousands of kilometers inside Russian territory, they had almost nothing. The Western allies had long-range missiles that could do the job, but they refused to deliver those weapons. And when they finally delivered them, they restricted their use. You couldn't attack inside Russia, you couldn't target this, you couldn't target that. Ukraine was being attacked by a country the size of a continent, with its most important targets shielded by thousands of kilometers, and being forbidden to strike back where it hurt the most. The solution, therefore, had to come from within. And it was in that void that Aerodrone came in. The company didn't start from scratch. Since 2015, it had been developing drones with significant payload capacity. First for agriculture, then for civilian deliveries. In 2017, it launched a prototype capable of carrying 60 kilos. And this experience, years before anyone thought about war, ended up proving to be the most valuable asset the company had. Because carrying 60 kilos of pesticide is not that different, in engineering terms, from carrying 60 kilos of explosives. When the war started, Aerodrone took what it already knew how to do and scaled it up. They took the Sky Ranger Swift Ultralight, reinforced the structure to handle more weight, installed extra fuel tanks to extend the range, and fitted the plane with everything it needed to fly on its own. Remote control via satellite, autonomous navigation, real-time data transmission. The result was the E-300 Enterprise, payload capacity of up to 300 kilograms. Endurance of 8 to 12 hours in the air. Modest cruising speed, 130 kilometers per hour. Official range between 800 and 1,500 kilometers. And with a reduced load on a one-way mission, there are reports of flights reaching close to 3,000 kilometers. To give you some context, that's more range than many Western cruise missiles. And here's a piece of information within these specifications that may seem small, but it's going to turn out to be one of the most important in the entire project. Look again at the cruising speed. 130 kilometers per hour. That's absurdly slow. So slow that it seems like a design flaw. A normal military plane flies 3, 4, 5 times faster. And even so, it was exactly at this speed that Aerodrone decided to keep the E-300. The reason? Hold on to that question. The answer will come up later in this video, and when it does, it will change how you see this entire machine. Here's another interesting project detail. The E-300 was originally presented by Aerodrone as a cargo transport drone. Things like delivering parts to the front, evacuating the wounded, bringing supplies. The Deep Strike version came later, and it came together fast. In March of 2023, Aerodrone signed the contract with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Mass production began. And less than a year later, the E-300 started to appear in places where Russia swore it would never be attacked. April 2nd, 2024. Tatarstan, Russia, 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This is the kind of place that war manuals call strategic depth. A region so far from the front that the Russians considered it impossible for any Ukrainian attack to reach there. To hit Tatarstan, it was necessary to cross the entire Western Russian air defense system, to get past radars, fighter jet bases, and the industrial heart of Russia. No one in Tatarstan believed they were at risk, and it was exactly in Tatarstan, in the city of Yelabuga, inside an area known as the Yelabuga Special Economic Zone, that Russia had built something very valuable for its war machine, a drone factory. Not just any factory, the factory. It was there that Russia began assembling on an industrial scale the Shahed 136 drones, which the Russians renamed Garon 2, which are launched every night against Ukrainian cities. Those drones that buzz like scooters and crash into residential buildings, power plants, and hospitals. The Yelabuga factory was the central cog in that machine. On that morning of April 2nd, around 6 o'clock, that changed. Security cameras and local residents filmed what happened. Something appeared in the sky over Yelabuga. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't a fighter jet. It was a small aircraft flying alone, low, and slow. Those who saw it from a distance thought it was an ultralight. Just some ordinary ultralight that had gotten lost. Maybe a route problem. It wasn't. It was a Ukrainian drone. Unmanned. On a direct course. Flying for hours in an almost straight line, crossing all of Western Russian territory without being intercepted. And in seconds, it dove toward the factory complex. The explosion was big enough to be heard throughout the entire city. For the first time in the history of this war, Russia had been attacked more than 1,000 kilometers from the border. And it wasn't a Western cruise missile. It wasn't an expensive, sophisticated imported weapon. It was by something that looked to a casual observer like a little recreational airplane. The operation was claimed by Ukrainian military intelligence, and the Ukrainian government made a point of saying one specific thing: no Western weapons were used. It was all domestically built, Ukrainian technology, including the drone that flew the 1,300 kilometers. That drone was a civilian ultralight converted into a weapon. Some open-source analyses identified it as compatible with the E-300 Enterprise. Others as a similar model based on the Aeropract A-22. In any case, it marked the first time that this type of platform, civilian planes adapted into long-range weapons, hit a target deep inside Russia. And the E-300 would become the most well-known example of this new category. The attack on Yelabuga was just the beginning. In the following weeks, Russia discovered that its sanctuary had come to an end. The E-300 and other long-range Ukrainian drones that appeared afterwards began to reach places deeper and deeper within Russian territory. The Yelabuga factory, once considered untouchable, became a recurring target. It was hit again in May 2025 and again in June 2025. The Russian production capacity for Shaheds, which was supposed to reach 8,000 units per year, began to suffer regular interruptions. But the attack that shocked military analysts the most was still to come. In 2025, Ukrainian aircraft-type drones took off from Ukraine heading east, crossed the Russian border, traveled hundreds of kilometers deep into Russian territory, passing through regions where the Russians swore their air defenses were impenetrable, and kept flying. When they finally dove toward the target, they had flown about 1,500 kilometers, one of the deepest penetrations ever recorded into Russian territory. The target was Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat, a gigantic petrochemical complex in Bashkortostan, a region at the foothills of the Urals, on the edge of European Russia. A place where no military analyst ever imagined a Ukrainian drone could ever reach. Russian analyses attributed this and other long-range attacks specifically to the E-300 Enterprise, with reports estimating flights of approximately 1,700 kilometers on some missions. Remember that unanswered question from earlier? About why Aerodrone insisted on such a slow cruising speed of 130 kilometers per hour? Here. There's the answer. Most modern anti-aircraft defense radars are Doppler type. They work by measuring the frequency shift reflected by moving targets. The faster the target, the clearer its signature on the radar. But there is a lower limit. When something flies too slowly, the radar tends to filter it out as noise, like a bird, like a leaf carried by the wind, like nothing. The E-300 takes advantage of this. It flies exactly in the speed range that confuses the radars. It's almost like a ghost signature, something that's there, but the detection systems have been programmed to ignore it. The slowness of the E-300 isn't a flaw, it's an advantage. Russia's reaction, finally realizing this, was to try to adapt. In October 2025, Ukrainian sources began reporting a change in Russian behavior. Small interceptor drones, specifically designed to hunt down long-range Ukrainian drones, began to appear in Russian airspace. The Russians had realized that expensive missiles and conventional air defense systems were useless against an aircraft that flies low and slow, and it costs a fraction of that. The Russian solution was simple: build their own drones to shoot down Ukrainian drones. And that's exactly where those images from the beginning of this video come back. You know that drone full of holes flying deep inside Russian territory? It's an E-300. And that infrared camera that filmed the approach wasn't from a conventional air defense team, it was the onboard camera of a Russian interceptor drone. Hunting the E-300 from the sky, unloading burst after burst at it, and even after dozens of hits, still not able to bring it down. This is the beast that Russia had to devise a new way to hunt, and still isn't succeeding. Remember that awkward question from the start of the video? And what if the advantage in modern warfare no longer belongs to the richest side? The E-300 is one of the first concrete answers to that question. And it's proof of something that few armies in the world want to admit. Sometimes the war of the future won't be won by the side with the most expensive technology. It'll be won by the side that learns the fastest. If you enjoyed this analysis, leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And subscribe here so you don't miss the next stories about what's changing in modern warfare. See you next time.